Hi, and welcome to a Small Medium at Large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Hyson, bringing you intimate interviews beyond normal boundaries. I want to thank all of you listeners for sticking with us for the last 3 years for our podcasts. We've really enjoyed having your comments, liking, sharing, subscribing. I want to also thank my daughter Nancy and my son Richard for producing the show, posting it for me, and keeping us rolling along. This is our 86th show, I think, 85th or 86th show. And we have such a collection of interesting writers, scientists, all sorts of unusual characters. So please come and join us. And if you haven't seen a show recently, check back with one of the ones we have from the past. So let me tell you something about our special guest today. Robin Aisha Landsong is a transformational speaker, visual artist, medicine singer, and medical health intuitive. She had two near-death experiences during the Rhodesian War in 1977 when she was 8 years old. When she was called back to life by the medicine song of a rural Zimbabwean woman, it opened her own medicine songs, and she has given singing medicine to over 16,000 people. Her specialties as a craniosacral therapist are trauma resolution, the neurobiology of connection, and restoring the natural rhythms in the body. She sees each person's gifts, strengths, and underlying cause of their physical, emotional, or spiritual distress. Robin helps people come home to their creativity, intuition, and embodiment. Today, we will be talking about her newly released book, Loving Bravely, a memoir, miraculous near death of a girl abducted, shot during war, and sung back to life by an African woman. A reviewer wrote about her audiobook that listeners will find this memoir profound, inspiring, and beautifully written. They describe it as an extraordinary medicine journey that the world needs. Myself, personally, I could not put Robin's book down, and I did not want to be interrupted. I started on one night and I finished it the next day. It spoke to my soul on childhood trauma. On her website, robinlandsong.com, ROBINLANDSONG.com, all lower cases, she offers classes, sessions, retreats, meditations, and more. Let's welcome Robin here today. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you so much, Gail.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah.
Uh, I have many different things throughout that I'm going to probably jump around in between our storytelling, but I do want you to share these stories with us as much as you feel comfortable to share. But it's a question I ask every one of my listeners. If you could tell us what it was like growing up in your home and in your particular situation, what was the instance that led to your abduction?
hmm And and so in all my research on trauma resolution, the biggest thing that really dawned on me was how much generational interruption ends up affecting our childhood. And so
Mhm.
if there was a war, if there was oppression, if there was poverty, if there was, something that interrupted, because all mammals have that natural instinct to care for one another and especially their children. So, what happened in history that made it so parents not only aren't protecting their children, but they're harming their children?
Mhm.
So, like many people, I was growing up in that situation, not protected and being harmed. And so, what led to the abduction is the neighborhood I lived in. There was a house nearby that tended to gather, we'll say, confused beings, and it was a kind of a house of danger. All the other kids knew that, just like don't go near that house. So one of the people that frequented that house spotted me as an unprotected child. It's 1977, so this is before child protection is even in existence in most states.
And
And
where were you? What city were you? Were you in the city or the country?
I was in the suburbs on the East Coast.
On the East Coast.
hmm And so he spotted me as an unprotected child who walked home from school and just came to my school at the end of the school year, end of the school day, and got me. And I'd seen him in the neighborhood, and I already knew that he was dangerous, likely military trained by the way he stood and the way when he did get me, the way he assaulted me.
Hmm.
So it's a strange thing to say that it's lucky that I was already a child abuse survivor, because my instincts, my strategies around coping and getting numb, fawning, getting really quiet, figuring out what does this abuser need me to be so I'm going to survive the next 5 minutes. And so that's the level of threat that it was. It was, am I going to make it, you know, in this next 10 minutes? Or is this the end of my life?
And in your own home, were you being threatened by your parents or your siblings, or was there anyone in your own home growing up that you had a closeness with, or was it all in difficult relationships?
I had a fantastic cat. That cat was
Hmm.
like a gift from Creator. And he was strong and bold, and he showed me what it is to stand up to a bully. So that was really my connection. And one of my siblings would always say, "In this house, it's every man for themselves." So it looked fine from the outside, but on
Hmm.
the inside, it was there wasn't authentic connection, there wasn't safety, there wasn't bonding, there was trauma bonding, but there wasn't safety bonding. And so many listeners know what I'm speaking of in terms of that attachment trauma, and this is what I like to teach on from my training, is when a child has the dilemma of needing to belong to their family system, but their family system is a source of danger instead of love or protection, that creates such a schism in a child, and the child has to make all kinds of compromises and difficult choices in that circumstances. Like, will I just set myself aside and go along with the family culture? Will I be a rebel and be outcast by them? So again, that's what I love to help people heal, is that attachment trauma, because I've had to do, so much work. And one of
Hmm.
my favorite teachers, Daniel Siegel, talks about the term earned attachment, meaning for, it's even, I think it's estimated 80% of us kind of have some degree of attachment trauma. And so he talks about earned attachment being, once we've become adults, then we undo the learning that we're worthless. We undo the guilt and the shame enough so that we can choose and connect to ourselves and connect to others. And those are really the crux of a lot of my healing sessions, is helping people regain the ability to self-connect and therefore have the option of connecting to others and community, in addition to your cat.
Hmm. So I I've often wondered, or you've probably seen yourself, the same sort of things where some children who have trauma, even though it may be coming from that parent, they're still clinging to that parent. And is that a different type of where one child might be running from the parent, afraid for what they might do, whether it's physical abuse or emotional abuse, and then another child wants to go rushing back to that person and be
Mm-hmm.
with the one that's doing that? Is there, what's the psychology of that? Like,
Yeah, isn't that interesting? There was it wasn't nice research, but it still was research where it showed this little baby duckling, how they'll follow behind the mama. And that's their biology, is to follow mama. And strangely enough, somebody thought of this experiment where they made a little robotic duck, mama duck, and the mother duck was kind of off somewhere that it couldn't be found. So they made this little robotic duck, and it would turn around and kind of like spit matter at the babies, and they would kind of all take cover, and then they would follow her again. And it wasn't even their biological mother.
uh-huh.
So what I'd like to say for everybody is to forgive yourself, no matter what your strategy was, whether your strategy was leaving home and running away and getting drunk, or clinging with your narcissistic parent. And so I'd like to go ahead and sing to that, because so many people have shame about how they coped. But we
Mhm.
coped based on our personal biology, our kind of innate personality structure. I would add in karma and our past lifetimes, with this person, with other ways of strategizing. So if all the listeners can just drop in for one moment and receive this singing medicine as compassion for however your strategy was to cope in your childhood, whatever dilemma you had to deal with, and whatever methodology you came up to deal with it. I am no I am he yeah he oh I am oh.
Mm. That's so lovely. And I just want to intercept here for a second to let listeners know that if they enjoy any of the music they're hearing now, that you have a CD that can be purchased to listen to. I'm assuming it's this particular same kind of sound music.
Yes, yeah, it's the singing
And
medicine.
yes, and you have another one in the works. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. I always have something in the works.
So, but another music, another CD or
Yeah,
musical.
yep.
That's wonderful. I find I've been listening to it since I'm researching before you came on our show. So I've listened to you singing from your website numerous times. I
Mhm.
listened to the all 7-1, the little samplings, and I found it very soothing and very calming. You have
Beautiful.
a lovely voice.
Yeah. Yeah, I went down to
So,
Los Angeles and I made that album, and we finally got done production last spring. So it's called Roots Drinking Rain, and you can either get it directly through my website, like you said, robinlandsong.com, or you can go on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, all of those.
and let's download the
Yeah.
new modern way.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
exactly.
I want to talk a little bit about, because I have questions about your abduction and the things that were going on. I
Hmm.
had so many questions from your book, and I also did quite a bit of crying as I read through it. Um, when you found yourself in another country, I mean, I think you were 7 years old.
8.
Oh, 8 years old. How long did you end up being there before you were back in the parents' home again? And like what thoughts ran in your mind in the beginning? Like the shock or like how did you even figure out where you were and how did you communicate? And were your parents out there going, "Oh my God, she's missing. We're at search parties. They got pictures of you up on all on the things." And were they all looking for you? And was there a lot of town, cry about what happened to our Robin? What happened?
So, whew, that was a lot of questions at once.
I know, I guess.
So I'll cover so when I became conscious again, because the abductor drugged me during the transport, and when I became conscious again, I didn't know that I was all the way in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. And so that was the height of the Civil War in 1977. So there's reason to believe he was going to be a soldier in that war. He's from the US, white American. And the, the Rhodesian government was recruiting to have more soldiers on their side. And so I woke up, knew I was in serious danger, had no context for where I was. The first clue for me, probably as you remember in the book, is when he took me in the bar and he paid with foreign money. So that was my first clue. That was, um, in people's accents. And the moment I realized I was in Africa is when he had assaulted me and I was hospitalized. He came and got me out of the hospital and no one stopped him, even though he was the cause of me being in the hospital. And so then he took me to a market where he was connecting with other military people. And that's when of course, I'm traumatized, I'm in pain. And so my comprehension is slow, but I'm looking around and I'm looking at all these very dark skinned black people in very bright colored clothes and this market that like they're calling out in a language I've never heard. And so I finally put it together in the link in my mind of like, these are match the National Geographic pictures in my mind of Africa. And so
Mhm.
that was my linking point. And the moment where I realized he had abducted me all the way to Africa, it's hard to describe the kind of abject. I mean, it's kind of like off the scale on abandonment and like, what am I even gonna do?
I couldn't even figure out how he did it. Where's your passport? Where's a piece of paper? Where's your visa? I mean, did he put you in a box? I could not figure out how he took you from the US. And in 77, people were looking for passports. It wasn't, like 100 years ago or something. How he got away with all of that. I mean, it's horrifying.
And and when you do the research on child trafficking, it's shockingly easy. And
Oh,
so he, remember, he's a psychopath. He's very intimidating. He's military, which gives him more kind of pass through.
hmm.
Um, I was drugged, so I can't say for sure. Um, I kind of have learned not to say because people have lots of critique. I was not put in the cargo bin. I do know that because I'm still alive,
Yes.
and so I think he just had me with him, and that I was, I looked asleep. So coming up with papers is, like I said, human trafficking. If you research it, it's kind of horrifying how, because even today with all our modern check systems, it's still a problem. And
It's and when I'm thinking of these, when I reading your story, that was like the farthest story ever imagined in my mind of abduction. I'm imagining, a person gets where they become a slave somewhere and they make them do all this work or other things. But what you went through was the strangest abduction story I could ever possibly imagine. And I can't imagine of a second one like that.
yeah, and so the interesting thing is, during the Vietnam War and the Rhodesian War, child abduction, especially white girl child abduction, was extremely high in the Rhodesian War. That was a military tactic. So it is extremely unusual. I haven't met anybody else that was abducted from America to that war. Someday I might meet that person because my book is now published.
Yes,
But
you never know.
yeah, yeah. And I think the really key thing from a spiritual karmic perspective is these highly unusual circumstances got me to these women and to these men who were loving. And so I've had many astrology readings, past life readings, and all of them point to that I've had many more lifetimes that were tribal than urban.
Hmm.
And so the sense is I already knew these people from past lives, and so this horrible circumstance of getting me back to them so that I could experience what true mama love was like, so that I could have the singing medicine opened in me. And I'll just kind of give a little bit of spoiler ahead. When I returned in 2017, 40 years after the war, and I found the land where the village had been, of the people that took me in, and I was able to bow down on that land and say my prayers of thank you for them saving my life, because I wasn't of their race, I wasn't of their language, I wasn't of their nationality, but they still saw a child that needed mothering and they gave it. And so that's the real crux of why I shared my story. I certainly gave enough context around it to help people understand how I got there. But the real reason, I'll just go ahead and show you the cover. The real reason I
Oh,
wrote this book
beautiful.
was to give the love that I was given. Like, I wrote, this took 16 years. And my goal was that when people open up the book and read through, that the love from the mothers comes right off the page into their heart. So, uh, so
I I
that's
think you
that's why I
did.
wrote it.
And also, I loved reading the perspective of the child and how you didn't have a name for person, so they became the man who does this, or, because you didn't know their names yet, or you had ways of naming them yourself. So reading it through a child's eyes, I was very deeply touched, and it brought me back into my own childhood. I just couldn't not help this. So I feel anyone that's going to read this book that's had childhood trauma, I think, well, for me, it was a very eye-opening, also very simplistic way of saying, this is why I'm like this, because this is what was happening. And this is why I'm withdrawn right now. Or, I mean, it was, anyway, I mean, I'm going to be 70 next year, and I learned a lot about my childhood reading this.
Hmm. And
And
that's some of the greatest feedback I'm getting. And that's, like I said, I took 16 years to write it because, not only like in the beginning did it take a lot to just get all the content out, remember everything. People interviewed me, people asked me questions. I had about 45 beta readers and about 9 professional editors in the process. And they would each ask me for a little bit more detail, a little bit more context, a little bit more emotion. Like, what did the food taste like? And so that's why it's so sensory and so detailed, is because I
Mhm,
took my time. And then each training I did in trauma resolution, I'd go back through and do another pass on the book to do just what you're saying. One, to make it more palatable. So I made the trauma parts as brief as possible, just enough to get the facts across. And I made the parts that were loving as slow, as long, and as detailed as possible. And that's the feedback I'm getting, is that people are saying, oh, it was that one line that completely shifted me thinking from the abuse was my fault to understanding my parents weren't prepared to be parents. Or, oh my gosh, there was all this generational context of why this trauma ended up getting passed down onto my little body. So it is catalyzing. And that was part of the intent. And also, it's not just kind of raw dump. Like I said, that's why it took so long to write it, is because I wanted to give my healing, not just the raw, undigested trauma content. And I see books out there where, in my view, they published too soon. They should have done more
mhm.
therapy. They should have done more body work. They should have gotten 5 more editors so that they were delivering healing and resolution and integration. And that's why people are, every day I'm checking, Facebook and getting these messages of like, oh my gosh, the way you said that, I suddenly realized I was okay and I am valuable and the abuse wasn't my fault.
I, uh, and there's also my own judgment of saying, look what she's done and came through. Yours was like a walk in the park compared to this trauma. But I can't compete. But I've got my own crazy, crazy stories.
And
I
the biggest thing I've learned, like I said, I've done like over 16,000 sessions with people, and the biggest thing I've learned is it's the context. It's not necessarily the content of what happened, it's the
Mhm,
context. So if it was a person you trusted that abused you, that is harder to heal. If the
mhm.
cultural context blamed you and said, you were wearing the wrong thing, you walked the wrong way, you breathed the wrong way, you ate the wrong way, for some reason it's your fault. That
Yes.
makes it harder to heal in a and one psychotherapist who was so articulate, she said, all my teenage girls are fine. It's the culture that is telling them that they need to be thin and sexy at 14. Like those mentally ill cultural contexts
Mhm,
are a huge part of the problem in the individual. So much of what we need is cultural healing, community healing, family systems healing, so that the individual who's actually psychologically fine can be in a healthier context. So
mhm,
that's one of my big messages also. And again, that's why these conversations are so important, is how do we get people who are blaming themselves to land into self-compassion? And I took a really fantastic training through Stanford on compassion, and it's a breath away. So, self beratement, self rejection is taking your emotions and holding them at arm's length on a stick. All of my teachings are about this too belongs. How can I befriend my difficult emotions, my difficult body sensations, so that I can get to recover the full spectrum of my emotions? Because when we reject our sadness, our anger, we don't end up being able to feel our joy, our curiosity, our creativity
mhm.
to the same level as if we said, this too belongs. My whole spectrum of humanity. And I'm going to have compassion that I coped the way I did. I'm going to have compassion that it's difficult for me to self connect. I'm going to have compassion that maybe I'm numb for a decade. Because I'm 55 at this point, and honestly, my healing it took like all of my 20s and into my 30s, and by the time I was 40, the intensity slowed down and the quality of it changed, and it was able to go from being kind of what I call the gritty years to more spiritual healing, more relationship healing, more how can I refine how I treat myself. So I'm gonna sing to people's confidence that it's worth investing in your own self connection, your own self recovery, and that needs to be done in connection with the land, in connection with our breath, and in connection with loving others. So I'm going to sing to people's confidence that they can take their next step forward, whatever that looks like. Shuneyaheyam owe Shuneyam na I am no way. Oh, ye, oh, am, I am, oh.
Lovely. Well, we're jumping around, but that's okay. We were talking about later in the years, but I want to go back to my questions that has to do with when you were 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You had a near-death experience, and I was hoping you could share some of that with us, how it happened. But I want to tell you what I learned from you
Mm-hmm.
in reading this, and I just felt it was such an important thing that I don't know why it never even dawned on me. But for all of our listeners who've experienced the near-death experience, I know they've heard me talk about mine. It was when I was it was in 1977
Oh,
when
really?
I was, yes, 21, and I was giving birth to my daughter, and I had preeclampsia and toxemia, and I was at home giving birth, and I'd never seen a doctor the whole 9 months, so it was all kind of a surprise to be rushed to, in what they say in the woods, nearly dead, to an emergency room. And I repeat over and over to people about the experience of what happened and how I learned about the beauty of the other side and all this. But I've only talked about it like this, just as oh, yes, this is what happened. But after I read your book and was listening to what you were saying on your meditation on your website, you were sharing going back to the moment and being in that place. And I don't know why. And I've done tons of meditation. I've done all kinds of retreats and classes and all these whatever things over the last 40 years. It never occurred to me to actually re-experience that beautiful place. I mean, I verbally would say, oh, yes, and there were flowers and everybody's looking at me like I was going to die, but I kept thinking it was all beautiful and wonderful, but nothing would come out of my mouth. So there's a comfort with all other people when they share their near death, because you realize, yes, that's what happened to me as well. But I never thought about revisiting it. And I think what I understood is that you go back to that beautiful place. You don't sit there and say, oh, yeah, I had that experience. You welcome it back in. And I
Mm-hmm.
was wondering if you could speak. So it's a double question here,
Right.
telling the listeners about what happened to you and how you ended up in near death and what you experienced. And then if you could elaborate on what I just said, what I learned from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll start there. And it kind of occurred to me recently that I could transmit this to others because regularly in my meditations, I visit with the beings that I met on the other side, and I'll kind of go through some of them in a moment. And so that's my meditation. Like at my heart is my royal shepherd. At my third chakra, that's actually my second death experience, that's Shiva. And at my throat, that's the ancestors in the land. And so I regularly do a meditation where I go down through my chakras. I meditate half an hour to an hour and a half every day. And whenever I have a big question, that's who I go to. Whenever I'm in session and I'm wondering, especially kind of early on, I would call on my royal shepherd that some people might name Jesus. And I'll just kind of share this part. I was doing a session. This is probably about year, maybe like 7 or so in my practice. I've now been in practice for 22 years. And I felt the presence of Jesus show up. And I said, "Oh, great, you're here to help." And he laughed and he said, "Oh, no, no, I'm here to watch you do your thing." I experience him as very, very funny. And I have a living, dynamic relationship with him. There was once I was working on finding a publisher for my book. And I went to this writers' conference, and it was really not the right place for me. It was kind of fiction romance. I didn't know that ahead of time. It was more science fiction and kind of thriller books. And it was like, whew, I am so out of place here. And so I wasn't having a great time. And so I ended up leaving, going out to my car and just kind of, forfeiting the rest of the days. And I got in my car, and my royal shepherd said to me, "You could have left yesterday. I am never going to ask you to suffer like this to do your mission." And I was like, "Oh, I thought I had to do this." He's like, "No, no, I'm not going to ever ask you to be with the wrong people and be miserable to do your mission. That my divine assignment is to offer. It's never to prove, it's never to convince. Because when people have a mindset where they're not available, don't have the capacity to hear what I'm sharing, and they just want to kind of find how they can convince themselves that child abuse doesn't happen, child abduction doesn't happen, it's not my job. I worked on my denial. That's my big project with denial, is working on my own. And so I've done that. That's my commitment. So I offer. And for those who are ready, I offer help in their healing process, through the singing medicine, through my art. So this is some of my art behind me. This is actually my art printed on a towel, which is available to everyone. And so then to go back to your other question about like what actually happened in my death experience. So again, I was in Rhodesia, 1977. That's the height of the Civil War. And so even though I had been taken in by loving people who, found me, I was hungry, I was thirsty, I had been abandoned by the abductor, and he kind of gave me to another man who ended up just leaving me in the bush. And so these people took me in. And so I thought, this is my new life. And I still didn't understand the context of the severity of this three-way civil war. So one day I wandered too far from the village. Unbeknownst to me, there was a battle starting, and there was a soldier that was scouting the perimeter of that field. And again, I've been able to go back and find this exact spot. And so there was a small creek, and he was on the other side. And so he immediately raised up his rifle, and I thought, this is my last moment. And in my heart, I was asking him for mercy because I was receiving more love and acceptance than I'd ever experienced. And now he's ready to end me and doesn't value me at all. And I can't, again, as a child, I can't make sense. Why does he hate me? So, that's as much time as I had to contemplate. I didn't turn and run because I was so frozen and shocked and it was also so quick. So I was so close to him, I could see his finger pull the trigger. And I heard the gun go off. The bullet grazed the top of my head, and I got blown off my feet and slammed down to the ground. I now know from going back and doing the research that scopes are for longer distance. And so they're off. Scopes are off when you're really close. So he was aiming here, but because he was so close, to my good fortune, it grazed the top of my head. So, but I still began to die of blood loss. So it didn't go in my skull, it went across my skull. And so I began to rise up. I went through the back of my heart out, and then I met a series of different beings. I love that my lighting just changed as I'm telling this story.
That was very interesting. It got
that's yellow again.
Okay.
And so So I'll kind of give context. So as I was writing the book and I was speaking of like all these different beings I met who kept purifying me and ridding me of any thought that the child abuse was my thought. My main editor at that time, he said, "Yeah, you've gotten across to me that they all loved you and cleared you, but what was unique about each one?" So I went back and I worked on the book and I wrote like what was unique about my royal shepherd. And his gift to me was to show me the web of life. And he touched his forehead to mine. And again, I do many attempts to keep drawing what he showed me, and this is one of them. This is
Mhm.
also Pisces. And so this is something of the web of life that he showed me. And so that we're all valuable. We're like living gems in this web of life. And the next being, again, purified all the kind of repressed emotion from my 8 years. And he showed me, again, in a new way, that I am connected and that I'm powerfully connected. And
Mhm.
one of the things I love to help people with in my sessions and classes and groups is so many people have associated being powerful with being dangerous. And that's called overcoupling. So they've associated it with being abusive, with being manipulative. And so I love to help people uncouple that power is just fine. And the more clearing and healing and purifying we do, we can drop all our things of confusion about manipulation, entitlement, misuse of power, and just be in our powerful divine gift. So mine is intuition, singing medicine, the visionary art, and the ability to see deeply what needs to be healed inside people on a physical, emotional, spiritual level. So the more we do our self-care, the more we invest in our trauma resolution, our attachment trauma, the more we invest in a clean whole foods diet, the clearer we can get in our authentic power to know it's innately good and that it doesn't need to be associated with misuse, with misalignment. So, again, that's as I'm saying it now, I'm just feeling kind of this rush through me of like, that is my big universal message. That's my cultural healing to offer. And especially in this time period when we have so many role models of misuse of power, that to just purify the definition of power so that we can stand up in our dignity, stand up in our agency and our resilience. And I'm going to sing to that right now too. So I'm singing to your resilience. I'm singing to your pure power that has nothing to do with abuse. Show where I am. Oh, where I. Oh, am no. Am near. Oh, he and just feeling at least one listener in this, kind of having the light come on, like it's okay for me to be in my power. It's
Mhm.
okay for me to be in my gift. I can trust myself. And when I first started my practice in craniosacral therapy, I at a certain point I realized like, oh my gosh, I have all this potency that comes through my hands, direct from my heart. I can see all these things. Like, what if I become a jerk and misuse this power? And there's all kinds of like spiritual leaders who get off track, and do
Oh, I
crazy.
think I've met a few of them.
You might have met a few of them. And so for a couple of months, I held back my potency because I was afraid I would misuse it. And then I finally dawned on me, if I'm so repulsed by the idea of misusing my power, I think I can trust myself that I'm going to use it for good and use it for healing. And so
Mhm.
then I really fully leaned into the magnitude of the intuition that comes through me and the grace of what comes through my hands. And no matter what mood or mind state I'm in, the healing work isn't about me. It's not about Robin's personality. It's about what is divine source? want to do in meeting this person's needs, in meeting this person's health concerns, in this person's distress? And how can I be the compassionate hollow bone to allow that healing to come through? And again, even though this is being recorded, I can still feel a couple light bulbs go off, and people have like, oh, it's okay to be in my healing potency. I can trust myself.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, so again, returning back to the beings I met, one of them I call the grandmother of all of us. At the final veil, when I was being returned back to my body, she sang to me as if I was a cathedral, and she was singing inside me. And she was saying, when you go back, it's going to be very difficult. You'll have many losses. But I'm going to sing to you right now. This is from that great mother, that someday you're going to become safe, and you're going to be able to sing to others to help them remember their wholeness, to help them remember their innate goodness, and that they too have resilience, that we've already lived through the worst of our trauma.
Mhm.
So going through the healing process actually, in some ways is quite difficult, but it's not as bad as what we've already been through. So
Mhm.
being avoidant of our feelings, of our trauma, sort of just keeps recycling it. So trauma response is making our decisions. And the beauty of doing our work and committing is we get free of trauma response, and we get our power, our divine calling, making our life choices rather than the default of unconscious trauma response.
Well, so this was when you experienced this at 8 years old, you didn't really know that what did you know then that you were having a near-death experience? Or was this something that you years later, as you started researching and doing these things, you knew you'd had something incredible happen, but were you able to relate to that was near death?
So in the second one, um, I ended up running from soldiers again. My village had been attacked. And so that was after I'd been shot. And so I had, I didn't have enough blood in my system. So trying to run, I started to bleed again, and I collapsed, and I went face forward in the sand. And so I had a second death experience. And this one was quite different. Like the very first experience was just this white horizon line, nothing happening, no characters, nothing to see. And and then somebody was singing to me, and they were singing in a child's rhyme. And the song was, "You will live, you will live." And so, I have a brain injury. I can't comprehend very well, but I can slow down the words, "You will live." Oh, does that mean I died again? And so I look
Oh,
around, I'm like, I feel like Casper the Ghost. I don't have a body. There's nothing here to see but a white horizon line, and there's a grand being singing to me. Oh, oh, I crossed over again. But, as you know, it's like you're just directly experiencing it. You're not necessarily analyzing it, especially as an 8 year
mm-hmm.
old. It's like, this is just what's happening. And so
Yes.
this great being brought me close to him, and he showed me many things, and he showed me kind of lands too. He in one hand he could create, and one hand he could destroy. And his skin was blue, and he had a black bun on the top, and he had all these amazing kind of jeweled beautiful things around him, but I was so focused on him. And so he gave me the vision that he could take two land masses and crush them together and make them into a mountain. And then he could take the mountain and bring it down grain by grain and make it into the beach. And so I called him God of Mountains Become Beaches. And like you said, I named things as a child, and now I understand
Yes.
that's Shiva. And so his great message to me was, out of destruction breaks open the ingredients for a new creation. So when we thought, something was stable, but now it's in pieces in front of us, and we don't even know how we're ever going to stand up again. We don't know how we're going to find any resilience or any even reason to go on. Then he's showing me that something new will be created. And what he said to me is, I'm returning you back to life because you are part of this new creation. And I didn't believe him. How could this, I've just lost everybody I just loved and that they loved me. And here I am again, totally alone, literally face down in the dirt, totally weak. I'm blind in one eye, I have a brain injury. And I said, I don't want to keep going. Like, take me back. And he literally commanded me, you will live. Like, this is not something to
Not
negotiate.
just done.
This is a
Yeah.
decree, and you read that in the book. And so he commanded me to crawl forward away from the massacre and towards a well where Mia Lucy found me the next day. And so she washed the blood off my face. She put me on her back as if I was her own baby. And she took me back to her homestead. And the really crux moment that happened here, and I didn't learn this until I went back 40 years later. I learned it from her granddaughter, that when a neighbor saw she had a wounded white child, and again, this war is about colonialization and about reclaiming land. It's a very, very complex war. I don't claim to understand it in the least. But what this person said was, "Oh my gosh, you have a wounded white child. Like, don't bother with her. It's too dangerous for your family to be caught having her, because she could be accused from the white side of abducting me. She could be accused from the extremist side of siding with the oppressor." And what she said was, "I won't throw her away. She's a living human being." And so that is the reason she's the reason why the book is called Loving Bravely, is because of her courage to make that choice. Because my research shows that about 24,000 civilians died in that war. And the reason I'm not one of them is because of her and because of all the other people who took the risk. Some of them were soldiers that were on the more extreme side. And
Mm-hmm.
I got to go back and talk to some of them, of course, have already died. But one of them said, and this gets me every time, he said, "I've been praying for you all my life." He said, "I didn't know what happened to you, after you got taken away from where we knew. But he said, I've been praying for you all my life." So it just meant so much to him when I returned and he could see that I was well. And especially my Amu's family. They did so much to save my life. And then when I got sent back to the US, they had no idea what happened to me. And their family was told I went back to the US and died, which spiritually, energetically, I did. And
Mm-hmm.
that so many people know what happens when you compress trauma, when you hold back. Because when I got home, my family was a family of secrecy, and their capacity to hear me was zero. And so when I tried
When
to,
your mother slapped you across the face after you came back, I'm sorry, but I wanted to kill her. I just, I, I could not, even though I've been in that situation where someone was so cruel to me that way that you cannot figure out how they could be that way. It still just ripped my heart out. I just, anyhow, I understand why you then became just completely withdrawn. And uh anyway, I find it's deeply emotional because I feel like, having read your story, it's not like just me hearing you say it. I really feel it in my heart. What you the resilience and strength you had to go through that, and
mm-hmm,
that scene. So that was very difficult to reconnect there. And unfortunately, I have that same kind of craziness of a family about secrecies with it. Everybody knows what's going on, but it's not allowed to be talked about.
right.
And I was someone who wanted to talk about it. So, I was called the problem child, like, you're not supposed to talk about any of these. Everything's a secret. And I had a lot of problems with that. It was very,
Right.
very tough.
And
And
for one of my colleagues, I learned a great term called capacity. And so when people's capacity to talk about the truth, to be with the sadness, to be with the anger, to be with the insult, the truth of the oppression, when their capacity is suppressed and so low, again, everything, your immune system goes down with it. Your joy, your empathy goes down with it. So if that can be part of my contribution through this book, is again, every day I'm getting emails and messages from people saying, I had secrecy in my family too, but reading your book, I feel like I can talk about it now. And I'm going to find the people whose capacity to have empathic listening is available. Because don't bother talking with people who are invested in lies. Don't bother trying to shift their mind state because, again, denial is everybody's responsibility to work on themselves. Do not try and pound the door down of somebody else's denial. It will end up getting spit back at you. And use your precious, beautiful, life force energy to find other people who are available to listen with empathy, with compassion, with capacity. Because,
Mhm.
and some people might say, like, well, you have to try to change the other side. Like, no, no, let them
You'll
fight it
never
out.
change the other side.
And neurologically, biologically, the more we try to change the person who has a very defended mind state, the deeper they go into their defended state. It takes something like a cancer diagnosis, a loss of a child, something catastrophic to break open the heart of some of those people. Sometimes I lovingly, and it might sound funny, don't take me wrong, I lovingly wish a near death experience on certain people. Like, oh, if you could just visit the other side, just like a small, small experience, doesn't leave long
Just a
term
walk on the
damage.
other side, right?
Walk on the other side, have that life review, see how you're impacting people, come back as a different person.
So here's another one of my questions. I don't even have to look at my list because they're coming up as we're talking. Uh, and I wanted to speak a little bit about Jonathan. But what happened? I felt that was the one part of the book that left me with a question, and I really wanted to know. Well, here we are, a couple with my multi questions. So this all has to do with your relationships. After college, after the trauma Washington trip, did you ever see or contact or any relationship with your parents again? That's the first question. And then part two, I know you had a brother and a sister who also had to undergo the craziness of life like you did as a child in your family. Did you reconnect or do any healing with them, or did they either any of them reach out to you in any way, or did you send them a copy of your book?
God, no.
Oh, okay.
So
Tell me.
my parents are deceased, and
Oh,
um, I actually waited on publishing until that was true. And so, so many people know that like abuse and attachment trauma in families tends to blow kids apart from each other. Sometimes kids will be able to like hold on to each other and,
mm-hmm.
parent with each other or help each other out. But sometimes if one person does their healing and the other person doesn't, there's no ground to relate on. So I have very limited connection with one of my siblings, and I appreciate what that person is able to offer, and I bless them on their healing path, and hope that that person continues to take steps forward. And there's not much to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
and
And
it's
your
like,
deceased parents, you didn't ever see them in the book when you said, I'm not seeing, that was it.
yep,
That's,
yep,
you
I
never
left
went
home
back
and
again.
never went back again.
Right.
Yes, so I did. And I kind of just went back to pack up my stuff and sell things, and then
Mm-hmm.
I never went back home again. And for a lot of people, it's like it's worth them to compromise because their family's got some good qualities, but for mine, like the danger was too high, and the good qualities were sand in my hand that just went
And
right out.
your mother was a nurse, right? And your
Mm-hmm.
father was an academic or a teacher? I don't remember.
Financial in the financial industry.
In the
Mm-hmm.
financial industry.
Yeah. So I grew up middle class, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of in my teen years, we were kind of like upper middle class. So poverty was um, not the issue,
No.
but certainly emotional poverty was.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just, these are just a few questions. I want to make sure I get them in
Mm-hmm.
that are important to me about some of the characters in your book or people in your life. I cried when you found out about Mama
Iatan.
Iatan and
Mm-hmm.
Mama
Tabello.
Tilbo. and Mia Lucy. And I wanted to know, I know that they're all gone, and I know that they saved your life and gave you love and taught you love. But I wondered, how did they pass away? Because I felt so attached to them. I got so sad that I just wanted to know, did they make it to an old age, or were they killed in the war, or did you know what happened to the three of them?
Yeah, so the first two were killed in the war,
Uh,
and
and were
and
they
then
like in their 50s or something, or you don't even probably
you know
know?
how little kids can't judge age?
Right.
Like everybody's just older, everybody's just a grown up to you. I
Hmm.
would guess they were in their 30s.
Oh,
Um, and so Mia Lucy died at a natural age, so that's Mayamu's grandmother. And so the beauty is I was able to go back and connect to Mayamu, and our reunion was incredible. And it's actually on my in my book trailer video, as well as, yeah, it's in my book trailer video as well as some of my other videos. I have a YouTube channel. And so that reunion was one of the most important moments in my life. And
and
the
could you tell our
creator,
listeners that was not an easy thing? It wasn't like you just said, "Oh, I'm going to go back there." Could you just explain a little bit? And is Jonathan, I wasn't sure if he's your partner or your husband or your friend. I wasn't sure what the role was,
right?
but what an important person in your life, because I felt he was really the one that said, I'm gonna investigate this, and really got the ball rolling. I could be wrong, but that's what
Hmm.
it seemed like.
Yeah, yeah, he played a really amazing role in my life. We're no longer partners. That ended 4 years ago. But it was a really essential role in my life. He kept asking me more with the book and really kept interviewing me and was a kind of a main support on that. And then also we had to find exactly where I was. And that took like 2 years of research. And, and he would look up, I knew I was in Rhodesia, but like, was I over the border in Botswana? Was I over the border into South Africa? Like, where was I? And so I would describe to him what everything I remembered. And then so he would research all over Africa, and then he would show me images, and I would say yes on that one, no on those. I've never been there, I've never seen that before. And he would purposely find things from all over Africa, and he kind of kept notes, and everything I said yes to was within the same 50-mile area. And then
Incredible detective work.
yeah, yeah, and then like when we found like the right color huts with the right color roof, and we found the Limpopo River, like literally like the adrenaline that went through my body to see those again, because again, like because I had so much
The light changed.
yeah, yeah, so much invalidation from my family, then to find these images that matched what was etched in my being, etched in my memory, was crazy validating. And then when my contact person I finally found there, when she found Mayamu and sent an interview video, that's all in the book too. That was like, I didn't even know how to take that in. I was so built around invalidation. And it's sort of like you're strong leaning against a 60-mile-an-hour wind your whole life. And then once I finally got validation, I didn't know how to not walk in 60-mile-an-hour wind. I didn't know how to just stand up in ease. So, so again, just saying and validating everybody, like as you do your healing process, and as you get some of the benefits, you get to relax. You get to stop being so tough. You get to stop being so defended. And that, if people get nothing else out of this, that's what I want them to get is take your next step to invest in yourself so that you don't have to live in such a hardened nervous system hypervigilant way, so that you can get to
Mhm.
your creativity, you can get to things like your intuition, you can get to your loving ability to connect to others. And those take a long time. Like my healing process took decades. you know
Yeah, me
i'm,
too.
I'm working on my second book about how to heal, and one of my editors said, don't say it takes that long. Like, this is a book. You're supposed to like encourage people and give them kind of all these like positive, like, yay, go team kind of notes. And I was like, I can say something positive that it's worth it, but it takes time. It's, depending on the magnitude of your abuse and the
Right.
complexity of it, it's layers and layers, and it takes time. And the big thing I want to say too is, if one methodology like talk therapy isn't your gig, find something else. Tai
Hmm.
Chi, movement, dance. Like at this point, I don't do talk therapy anymore. I do partner dance workshops. I do spiritual retreats because that's the level that my healing is at now. I get sessions with other people. I do trades and energy work and body work. And so, just if talk therapy is not your thing, do not use that as an excuse to not do your trauma resolution. Find another way, find a community um, conversation that's helpful to you, but just take your next step.
Um, there was a couple of, just this is a little bit off track here, but maybe not. You wrote in your book about Dina Metzger,
Mm-hmm.
Mandaza, I can never pronounce his name, even though I've
Mm-hmm.
known him for years. And I was wondering, did you actually meet them, or what did they have to do with you getting in touch with your village or Zimbabwe? Did they have something to do with that? And I just wanted to tell you, I'd forgotten until I read your little passage, and you're saying, oh, and this man who's a friend of Dina's, he's from Zimbabwe. Well, on one, they would, I think she also presented at our shamanism conference, but he came a few times. I have some incredibly beautiful photos of him, and I wasn't sure if you'd ever met him
Mm-hmm.
or seen photos or any of this, because if you hadn't, I would show them to you. Uh, and he had me do a reading on him. We went to do, healings with him at a friend's house, and I did the healing with him, and I totally forgot until I'm reading your book, because I went right to Africa when I did the reading, and I saw his village and I saw his chair that he sits in.
Mm-hmm.
When I described his chair with a lion's head, and then I saw his son running around, and I said, you need to go home. He's missing you tremendously. He needs you there. You're here in the States. You've got to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And we had such a beautiful, but I'd forgotten the whole thing till I'm reading your village thing. And then I'm reading, oh, I was there in Africa. Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And there was Mandaza. And he did such wonderful uh things at our shamanism conference. Wonderful story and gathering, and what a soul. So I was just hoping you could speak a little bit about him. He's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful healer and man, and I didn't know if you knew about him recently. I know he hasn't been able to get back into our country, and I didn't know if you had any updated news or anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he's a colleague, teacher with Dina Metzger. And
Hmm.
so I ended up finding her kind of through like a long circuitous route, kind of another craniosacral therapist was speaking of her. So I contacted her, and she ended up being the person who got me kind of the link, like a white man from Nimba, from another country. And so she ended up
Okay,
being
you're
the link.
frozen. Wait a second. Okay, yeah.
Okay. So she ended up being the link that got me back, and I ended up finding Vanessa and Digby, who ended up finding Mayamu, and so that was the connection link. So I did a workshop with Dina and met her in person, and then when I went back the second time to Zimbabwe in 2019, I went to a meditation in the African context conference, and so that's when I got to meet Mandaza in person.
That was in Africa then?
Yeah, that was in South Africa.
In
Hmm.
South Africa. Oh, so
Yeah.
then you met him in 2019?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and
Okay, so I met.
one of his students is kind of in conversation with me about, um, you never know whether these things are really going to come out, but about potentially doing a workshop together with him in the spring here in the U.S. So
Mhm.
I don't know his status as far as being able to get in or not.
Well, as you know, because you've met him there, and what a beautiful soul he is.
Yeah, and
Ju-
how much he this conference was a really beautiful mindfulness in the African context. So it was, about meditation. What does that mean in African culture? And the conference got very real, and like the conversations that happened around what happened during apartheid, because again we're in South Africa, got very real. And And so at the end of the conference, he was asked to say the closing words. And it still moves me every time. He got, the organizer handed him the microphone and he just started weeping
Mm.
because at that conference, he got to rest from his incredible leadership role. And because enough honest conversations happened about the horrors of apartheid and the still existing intense racism, he just cried. And I was so impressed that nobody came and took the microphone away from him. Nobody came and said something cheerful at the end. They let that be that honesty that he's tired, that he's sad, that he's brokenhearted as a leader. They let that be the end of the conference. And that was incredibly impressive to me, that
Mm.
like it just stayed quiet and still. And then eventually, you know, the microphone was set down and that's how it ended. And it didn't, I think if it was in America, somebody would have tried to like kind of cheer us up at the end or something, but they just
Right.
let the truth be still. And and again, I'm just going to bring that home for everybody. I'm going to say that again, like feel in your body, where can you let the truth be still?
Mhm. I'm so glad I asked you. And you've seen him more recently than I, because I saw him back years before that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to look and see if I can find his photo, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll have to send you. So I sort of feel like I was there in his village, but you were actually in South Africa. But I just feel like I went there between
Mm-hmm.
yours and his visions.
Mm-hmm.
I um I just want to go quickly over here. Oh, I Girl Who Smiles Like the Sun was a girl that you played with as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And she was the one that was in the adult. Am I correct that you met again in the
Mm-hmm.
40 years later?
Yeah, that's my ammo.
Okay, so she, um, could you just describe that moment of the two of you seeing each other and her gesture? Because that was such a moving thing. And it was, I don't, it was a, it was a no word needed validation.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Because I don't remember Venda and she speaks very little English. So we were coming in for the first time. Like, we'd been picked up at the airport and we were coming into being close to where I was in Zimbabwe. Again, this is 2017. And so Mayamo knows I'm coming and that we're going to meet up, but we haven't like planned, how that things just happen spontaneously. And, and so we're driving in, no arrangements, and who's coming out on a donkey cart with two other women and five children? She's coming out to go get supplies at the nearest town right when we were coming in. So the reunion happened by divine grace, not by human planning. And
Mhm.
she gets off her donkey cart. Fortunately, Vanessa has the wherewithal to start filming. So again, I have all this on video. I, shaking legs, get out of the Land Rover and we literally run to each other and hug. And she's strong and she's rocking me and she's saying, Aisha, Aisha. And um, and we purposely did not tell anybody where I was shot in any of the notes so that we wouldn't get confused stories. If people knew and had their own memories, then they would bring it forward. But we
Mhm.
purposely wanted to make sure we didn't have people kind of coming forward, hoping maybe to get money from an American or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so we said nothing about where I was shot. So she's hugging me, hugging me, hugging me, and then she backs up, and then she starts touching the top of my head, right where, and I do have a slight groove on the top of my head, right where the bullet grazed my head. And so she's making sure I'm okay, and she's saying, sorry, 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 meaning like, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And so I don't even have words to say that was the first direct validation from somebody who lived through it with me of my life.
Yes.
My whole nervous system, my whole worldview, my whole self view changed in that moment when she reached up and touched the top of my head where the bullet had grazed. So, yeah.
No
And we just,
words had to be spoken.
yep, no words had to be spoken. She just hugged me and rocked me. And And we were just like sisters. Again, like I don't speak Venda and she doesn't speak much English, but whenever we were near each other, we were just like touching each other and holding on to each other, which again, understand the level of racism in that country. Like white people and black people don't touch very much. And so sometimes when other people are around, she would get a little distance from me. And I would just respect that of like, I don't know the cultural implications of what that will be for her to be seen with a white woman later, but I'm just going to go by her guidelines. So, she led us to her grandmother's grave. I was able to bow down and sing. She gave me permission to do that. And but whenever we were with each other, we were holding hands, we were touching each other, just like we did when we were kids. She was 14 when I was 8. So that reunion is one of the most important moments in my life.
It's and it was very beautifully written in your book. Um, I have a couple more questions. We're about at our hour now, but I do have some other couple questions I want to ask if you've got a few more minutes because I feel they're very important around trauma.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Um, Here's where I go with my multi questions again. And I wasn't exactly quite sure how to do this, so if it doesn't come out right, but it, I've been doing these podcasts and I interview a lot of different people that have paranormal or psychic or, intense intuitive experiences. And one of the commonnesses I find, and this is not every single one, but when I even used to do like some answering questions at the Institute of Noetic Sciences for people who were having, psychic things and they were freaking out, they would email and I would answer their emails. So my question is that people who are children that have experienced trauma and abuse, the one common thing that I have found is that they're more intuitive or they're more in touch with their psychic self. I'm not saying that everyone isn't psychic, it's just a matter of the, relationship, but they seem more in touch with that because that's who they were with when they were hiding or in fear. They started to develop internal dialogues.
Mm.
What happened with you? And the other part of the question is about your kidneys. Is Are there related illnesses in adult life that you've seen from all your studies and schooling that develop in people who've experienced childhood traumas? Like, are there certain, you keep talking about the nervous system, and are there things that end up happening to, unbeknownst to us, we say, why do I have diabetes now? Nobody in my family had diabetes. I mean, I'm just saying, or I have high blood, whatever the things are, the different, I mean, most of these are very common diseases, but is there specifically diseases that might follow people who've had childhood traumas that are intense, like what you might have experienced, what I might have experienced, a certain really high level where your reality is really being screwed with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of the research talks about 80% of illnesses are the underlying cause is stress in the body, inflammation in the body. And so I'm going to go back to the very first piece of your question. So I agree with you that when you're wondering if you're going to survive the night, you have to hypervigilantly scan with what you've got. And so if you need to figure out, is my dad coming home drunk or is my dad coming home sober? And I got to figure it out before he gets to the door. Then your intuition is going to be hyper developed. And so one of the things I want to say is it took years to calm down just hypervigilantly reading for danger, to look for the beauty, to look for the good. And to now sometimes I'll see a teenager and I'll see their brain and I'll see their leadership potential and I'll see their career potential and I just get so excited. And so if it's the right circumstances, sometimes I leave them little notes about like your gift of this ability to lead others in this field is so strong. Please know I believe in you. So that's the thing of shifting from hypervigilance back to embodied listening. So that's the crux of all trauma healing, is coming back to your body sensation, coming back to your breath, coming back to your movement, shifting out of frozenness. And again, this is why partner dance workshops are now my therapy, is that if you're still rigid and you're still hypervigilantly scanning for danger, that's not much of a life. Um, and one of the ways I really love to learn is polyvagal theory through Stephen Porges. And he talks about kids who grow up being able to trust their mother is looking out for them. They are able to listen and hear a female tone easier because their mom's warning is their safety meter. For kids who grew up with a female caregiver who wasn't watching their back and who maybe was a source of danger, they scan the horizon themselves. They don't count on their caregiver to watch their back, they watch their own back. So those people have a harder time hearing a female voice, especially in a crowded room, because we grew up listening to the whole room to see if there's going to be danger versus listening to our mom say, "Oh, sweetheart, come closer to me." And that's so there's fundamental biological. So it all depends on what people is their vulnerable point, maybe in their body and their genetics, and what are the specifics. Was there abuse at the dinner table? Then you're going to have more digestive problems. Was there sexual abuse? Then there might be more reproductive problems. So, again, embodiment is the key. So, yeah, for me, my vulnerable area is my kidneys. And so, kidneys take a lot of hardship during threat to survival. So, working on adrenal support, I take a lot of herbal medicines. My diet is whole foods, super clean, no sugar, no wheat, no dairy. And I just take the time to cook at home because I am in charge of this human body. My choices directly are my primary first healthcare. And so when we put our agency, put our authority in somebody else as our healthcare provider, we all need help. I'm not saying don't get help. I'm saying take responsibility for yourself, what you eat, how you exercise is your first healthcare. So anything I've done really well because I started my healing at 19, at 20. So compared to a lot of people with the magnitude of trauma stress I've had, my body's actually done really well. So because
Mm-hmm.
I just worked on it all through my 20s and all through my 30s, I exercise a lot. I've gotten tons of body work sessions, so I've fared pretty well.
Mm-hmm. But I'm glad you spoke about that can affect the person's body, nervous systems, etc., especially if they haven't done like what you've done, which is take care of your body inside and out, which some of us have a struggle with it because of whatever trauma brought that part of
Exactly.
into them.
Yeah.
Okay. And so your kidneys are doing okay. I don't have to worry about them.
No.
Okay, so okay, now I just wanted to there was a couple of quotes that I wanted to share from your book that I thought were wonderful.
Hmm.
Um, and okay, we talked about the NDE, we talked about abuse and abandonment. Okay, so now I want to go to this, and then I'll ask if there's anything else you want to talk about. Okay. There was a quote in your book when you decided to change your life from going home to going out on your own with nothing. And I loved this. You said, the lack of freedom to buy what I want is worth the freedom to be who I am. I just wanted to share that. I have no question on it. I just felt I wanted our listeners to know how important that is and what you realized.
Hmm.
And I think that is really fabulous. And there was another quote, and then I'll be done with my quotes. One of your friends, I couldn't remember the name, but after you returned from Africa, they said to you, we need to be able to define our past completely to know it does not define us completely. And I thought that was also beautiful. I don't have a question. If you want to speak on any of it, that's fine. But I just had to share that because those two really just really set home with me. And I just wanted to be sure the listeners, until they get the book and read it themselves, I wanted them to
Mm-hmm.
hear those quotes.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there anything you'd like to say about those quotes, or is there anything you'd like to share, or any more wisdom or advice, or anything else you'd like to tell our listeners?
Mm-hmm. So I really want to, again, invest in the confidence of everybody who's got a creative project, a passion project. Again, this took 16 years. I spent incredible amounts of money on it with editors and taking time off from income earning activities to have the writing process. The audiobook was like $20,000. So if your project takes longer than you think, costs more than you expected, keep going. Keep
Okay, I will.
keep investing and keep giving yourself the green light. Keep saying yes. And and then if it's not as received as big as you expected or in the way you expected, keep going. And I'm kind of saying this to myself too, because my book was only released like a month ago. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm kind of waiting for it to like, for like kind of the bigger numbers to grow. And speaking of that, if people are willing to buy it and leave a review, that books are sold by word of mouth. And so leaving a review is the best thing you can do for an author because it gives other people who don't know me or haven't heard an interview the confidence to go ahead and invest in buying the book. And so yeah, invest in yourself, invest in your projects, keep going. If you need to take a break from it for a while, if you need to shift gears, if you need to get, another person's opinion about it, but just be willing to surrender. And that's the key is the number of times I surrendered this book over to divine source. You take it. I can't carry it. And they'd be like, okay, great, we'll take it. We'll brush off all your expectations. We'll brush off your limited thinking. And now we're going to give it back to you because it's your responsibility. So, yeah, I did native dances where I just gave up on it. And then creator said, you've got so much expectation on it, you've crushed it. So we're going to sweep off all the expectation and then we're handing it back to you because this is your divine assignment. So go, girl. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that to everybody now too of, yeah, just get sessions, do ceremony to keep releasing your idea of what you think it is so that you can be the hollow bone and let divine source write through you about what needs to be heard in this world today. What's your gift? What's your contribution from divine source to humanity? And that is a good question to keep everybody going in their creative projects.
Yes. I know you're saying to everyone, but I feel like you were talking to me
Great, excellent,
because
good.
I
That's
have a
what.
book that's been sitting around for 20 years. So, and in fact, when reading your book, I said, I think I should rewrite this because I really like it the way she did this.
Mm-hmm.
So now I see why you had 5 editors. You and I'm just saying that's why it's so well done. I also
Yeah.
want to mention to listeners, I think it would be a great Netflix or whatever the brand these days are for filmmaking. I
Right.
really do hope a screenplay writer picks it up and
Mm-hmm.
sees the value of what that can be done to show people, because some people don't want to read a book.
Mm-hmm.
If
Right.
they were to watch that film, I think they could is equally get out of it the growth and the resilience that you display in this, that is tremendously phenomenal and inspiring.
Yeah. And I look forward to finding the right screenwriter and the right people to work with. I've turned down 3 already.
That's oh great. So oh god, so I'm ahead of my time. So is there any last tidbits of anything you'd like to say before I close us out?
I think we've covered it, and I've got a YouTube channel. So I used to have a lot of singing medicine on the Landsong is my last name, and that's my YouTube channel. So if people want to go into this further, have more questions, want to be sung to more, there's just I think I have like 30 uh, videos on that channel. So and there's art like this on my website, and I have classes. I teach on generational healing. I teach on how to come home to compassion. And I also have individual sessions as well as group sessions. And
Beautiful.
my headphones are saying it's time to be done the interview.
Yes, so if you just hold on while I close us out, don't leave yet.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you so much for being with us here today, Robin. I really looked forward to this. I want to thank all of you listeners for joining us, for liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting. And I want to be sure that you remember, share your stories because stories can heal.
Hmm.
Bye.
Amen. Bye bye.